Earlier this week, the Coast Guard announced the largest cocaine seizure in its history. The result of which is what you're seeing here on these pallets. Nearly 50,000 pounds of cocaine worth more than $360 million.
November 8th, 2025, 3:47 a.m. The waters off the Pacific coast remained eerily still as thermal imaging revealed something that would shake the foundations of international law enforcement. Deep beneath the waves, a massive structure stretched nearly 400 feet in length, pulsing with the heat signatures of industrial-grade chemical processing equipment. This wasn't just another drug smuggling operation. This was a floating narcotics empire, a fortress of poison designed to flood American streets with enough deadly substances to devastate entire cities. Intelligence agencies had been tracking whispers of this maritime nightmare for 18 months. Coded transmissions intercepted by NSA satellites, unusual shipping patterns detected by Coast Guard surveillance, financial transfers moving through shell companies in 12 different countries, but nothing had prepared federal agents for what they were about to discover in the dark waters west of Baja, California. The vessel carried a cargo worth more than $15 billion on the street. Thousands of tons of processed heroin, cocaine, and synthetic fentanyl packed into reinforced cargo holds. 8 fully operational chemical laboratories capable of producing enough narcotics to supply the entire western United States for 6 months. And hidden deep within its steel corridors, nearly 400 civilians from across Central and South America, forced into slave labor under armed guard. At the helm of this floating catastrophe stood Miguel Santos Vega, a former Venezuelan military officer whose criminal organization had terrorized 3 continents. His network stretched from the coca fields of Colombia to the ports of Eastern Europe, generating profits that rivaled the GDP of small nations. For 2 years, his floating fortress had remained invisible to every radar system, every satellite, every surveillance aircraft deployed by international law enforcement. But on this November morning, that invisibility was about to end forever. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A recovered cell phone from a drug bust in Phoenix contained encrypted coordinates that led CIA analysts to a pattern they had never seen before. Supply chains that moved with military precision. Communication protocols that resembled special forces operations. Financial structures that operated like a shadow government. Deep inside Langley, counterterrorism specialists realized they weren't hunting ordinary criminals anymore. They were facing a sophisticated paramilitary organization that had weaponized the drug trade into a form of economic warfare against the United States. The floating fortress wasn't just a smuggling vessel, it was a strategic asset designed to destabilize American communities through chemical addiction and social collapse. The intelligence picture became crystal clear when surveillance drones detected the thermal signature moving slowly through international waters. 6 massive reactors operating around the clock. Armed patrol boats maintaining a protective perimeter. Anti-aircraft systems mounted on the upper decks. This wasn't a ship. It was a warship disguised as a freighter, bristling with enough firepower to challenge a small navy. President Trump received the briefing at 2:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The room fell silent as intelligence officers outlined the scope of the threat. A single vessel carrying enough poison to kill 60 million Americans. Hundreds of enslaved workers trapped in conditions that violated every international human rights convention. And a criminal mastermind who had openly declared war on American law enforcement. The decision came without hesitation. Operation Deep Strike would launch within 12 hours, combining the most elite special operations forces in the American arsenal. Navy SEALs would handle the maritime assault. DEA tactical teams would secure the chemical laboratories. CIA operatives would extract intelligence and coordinate the rescue of civilian hostages. And supporting them all would be the most advanced surveillance and jamming technology ever deployed in a counter-narcotics operation. But this mission carried risks that kept Pentagon planners awake through the night. The floating fortress was protected by over 200 armed mercenaries equipped with military-grade weapons, rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine guns, surface-to-air missiles capable of downing helicopters and aircraft. Any direct assault would likely result in a massacre of the civilian hostages trapped below decks. The tactical challenge was unlike anything American forces had faced before. How do you storm a fortified position surrounded by water when the enemy holds hundreds of innocent lives as human shields? How do you neutralize sophisticated defenses without triggering explosions that could sink the vessel and everyone aboard? How do you coordinate a rescue operation in international waters while maintaining the element of surprise? The answer lay in a combination of cutting-edge technology and old-fashioned military precision. Underwater drones would disable the vessel's communications and navigation systems. Stealth aircraft would eliminate perimeter defenses with surgical strikes. And then the most dangerous phase would begin as special operations teams infiltrated the floating fortress through underwater entry points. At 4:30 a.m., Pacific time, the first elements of the strike force began moving into position. 3 nuclear submarines surfaced in a triangular formation around the target. Their missile tubes opened silently as crews prepared electromagnetic pulse weapons designed to blind every electronic system within a 5-mile radius. High above, stealth bombers circled at 40,000 feet, their bomb bays loaded with precision munitions that could punch through steel without damaging the surrounding structure. But the most critical element of the operation remained hidden beneath the waves. 48 Navy SEALs had spent 6 months training for this exact scenario. They knew every corridor of the floating fortress from intelligence gathered by undercover agents. They had rehearsed the assault hundreds of times in mock-ups built at classified facilities, and they understood that failure would mean the deaths of hundreds of innocent people. The electromagnetic pulse fired at exactly 4:47 a.m. In an instant, every radar screen aboard the floating fortress went dark. Communication systems died mid-transmission. Navigation equipment shut down completely. Emergency lighting flickered and failed as backup generators struggled against the invisible wave of electronic disruption. Panic spread through the vessel as armed guards realized their sophisticated defenses had been neutralized by an invisible enemy. Radio chatter dissolved into static. Satellite links went silent. Even the encrypted cellular networks they relied on for coordination simply stopped functioning. From the chaos emerged the first phase of the American assault. Stealth aircraft dove from the clouds like mechanical predators, their precision weapons finding their targets with devastating accuracy. Guard towers collapsed in controlled explosions. Anti-aircraft positions disappeared in brilliant flashes of light. Patrol boats circling the fortress erupted into fireballs that illuminated the pre-dawn darkness. But the real battle was only beginning. Deep beneath the surface, Navy SEALs moved through the black water like ghosts, their breathing apparatus silent, their movements coordinated through hand signals that had been perfected through years of training. They carried weapons designed for close-quarters combat in confined spaces, non-lethal gases for crowd control, cutting tools that could slice through reinforced steel, and most importantly, the absolute determination to bring every civilian hostage home alive. The first breach came through the vessel's water intake systems. Teams of divers cut through protective grills and swam into flooded compartments that had never appeared on any blueprint. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as they moved through mechanical spaces filled with pipes and cables. Above them, they could hear the footsteps of guards running through corridors, shouting orders that no one could answer because their communication systems remained dead. The mission had entered its most dangerous phase, and the next few minutes would determine whether Operation Deep Strike became a triumph of American Special Operations or a tragedy that would haunt the nation for generations. 4:51 a.m. The steel corridors of the floating fortress echoed with confusion as armed guards stumbled through darkness, their night vision equipment useless against the electromagnetic blackout. Emergency sirens wailed from backup power systems, but the sophisticated command structure that had protected this maritime empire for 2 years was crumbling by the minute. In the chaos, Navy SEALs moved like shadows through flooded compartments, each team advancing toward predetermined objectives with deadly precision. Team Alpha emerged from the vessel's lower hull through maintenance hatches that led directly into the engine compartments. The air reeked of diesel fuel and chemical vapors as they navigated between massive generators and water purification systems. Intelligence briefings had identified these spaces as critical choke points where the vessel's power could be completely severed, leaving the criminal organization blind and defenseless. Simultaneously, Team Bravo cut through reinforced bulkheads 3 decks above, entering the main cargo holds where intelligence suggested the majority of civilian hostages were being held. The first thing that struck them was the smell. Human waste, fear, and the acrid stench of industrial chemicals created an atmosphere that would haunt these operators for the rest of their lives. Cages lined the walls like animal pens, each one packed with terrified people who had been forced into slave labor for months. The tactical situation was evolving faster than anyone had anticipated. Miguel Santos Vega and his lieutenants had retreated to a fortified command center deep within the vessel's superstructure, taking a dozen hostages with them as human shields. From this position, they controlled access to the chemical laboratories and the vessel's self-destruct mechanisms. Intelligence intercepts suggested they were prepared to detonate the entire floating fortress rather than surrender to American forces. Team Charlie pushed toward the laboratory complexes where the real nightmare was unfolding. Behind reinforced doors, they discovered industrial-scale drug production facilities that surpassed anything federal agents had ever encountered. Massive chemical reactors bubbled with synthetic compounds. Packaging equipment ran continuously, producing thousands of deadly doses every hour. And overseeing it all were civilian chemists who had been kidnapped from universities across Latin America and forced to perfect recipes for death. The rescue phase began with surgical precision. SEALs used non-lethal gas grenades to neutralize guards without endangering nearby hostages. Bolt cutters snapped through cage locks as terrified civilians were led toward emergency evacuation points. Medics moved through the crowds, treating malnutrition, chemical burns, and psychological trauma that would require years to heal. But the most dangerous phase was yet to come. Intelligence indicated that the floating fortress contained enough explosive materials to create a blast visible from space. Chemical precursors stored in sealed containers could become toxic clouds if released into the atmosphere. And somewhere in the vessel's maze of corridors, a desperate criminal mastermind was making calculations about whether to surrender or take hundreds of innocent lives with him. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the rescued chemists whispered to a SEAL medic about hidden passages that connected the laboratory levels to the command center. Blueprints seized during the electromagnetic pulse had missed these modifications, but the kidnapped scientist had been forced to help design them. Within minutes, Team Delta was rappelling through ventilation shafts toward the vessel's nerve center. At 5:23 a.m., the final assault began. Flashbang grenades shattered the darkness as SEALs burst through concealed entrances that Vega's security team never knew existed. The criminal mastermind reached for a detonation device, but American training and precision proved faster than desperation. In under 40 seconds, the command center was secure. The self-destruct systems were disabled, and the most wanted narcotics trafficker in the Western Hemisphere was in custody. The aftermath revealed the true scope of what American forces had prevented. Intelligence teams cataloging the vessel's contents discovered production records indicating this single floating fortress had been responsible for 30% of the fentanyl flooding into American communities. Financial documents revealed a network of corruption that reached into government offices in 7 countries. And encrypted communications exposed plans for additional floating laboratories that would have industrialized drug production on a scale never before imagined. As dawn broke over the Pacific, evacuation helicopters lifted nearly 400 rescued civilians toward medical facilities on the mainland. DEA chemists began the dangerous process of neutralizing tons of deadly chemicals, and intelligence analysts started the painstaking work of unraveling a criminal network that had operated with the sophistication of a shadow government. The floating fortress itself would be towed to a classified facility where every inch would be examined for intelligence value. Its laboratories would be studied to understand new synthetic compounds before they reached American streets. Its communication equipment would reveal the identities of corrupt officials who had enabled this maritime nightmare. And its financial records would guide investigators toward the offshore accounts that had funded this war against American communities. Operation Deep Strike had dismantled more than a floating drug empire. It had shattered a sophisticated threat to American security that operated with military precision and unlimited resources. The courage of Navy SEALs, DEA agents, and CIA operatives proved that no ocean is too vast, no fortress too fortified, when America's defenders move with unified purpose and unbreakable resolve.